I'm Sarah Dearbaugh, artist and owner of Studio276 in Cedar Mountain. I'm the legacy ambassador of the Mountain School of Strings and founder of the Cedar Mountain Music Project. That nonprofit supports our small community music events and traditions. I'm here today to celebrate my community and honor my mom, Ellen, a community leader that passed 2 months ago. Cedar Mountain was a summer sanctuary for my family. I'm a third-generation summer kid, but did do a little time at Brevard Elementary back in the pod days, so I can call myself a local. My early memories of Cedar Mountain were building tree houses, playing in the creeks, and getting as muddy as possible. My later teen memories were jumping off waterfalls and skinny dipping in my neighbor's lake. But you can't do that anymore, kids, because there's this thing called internet and camera phones. So when I was in my 20s, I watched my mom plant her roots in the heart of Cedar Mountain. Her welcome center was the hub for grabbing a snack before you went off into DuPont for a quick hike or an all-day hike. She was a classical musician her whole life. That's what she dedicated her time to. So when she was in Cedar Mountain and learned of the local schools canceling their orchestra programs, she got right on it, started her nonprofit called Transylvania Youth Strings, which is now known as the Mountain School of Strings, and to continue string music education. That was very important to our family. That was very important to her. Her mission was to make sure that every kid, really adults too, no matter their age, no matter their background, got the chance to learn a stringed instrument. She taught thousands of kids, including her own children and her grandchildren, and even the ones on the stage around town, you'll see she taught them as well. In my 30s, we started a family, 1 girl, 1 boy, and God only gave me 2 hands, so that's all I needed. So at the time we were living in Arizona, and after having kids, I started having these flashbacks of the creeks and the mud, and realized that saguaros weren't great for building tree houses in. So we decided to move back to Cedar Mountain to be closer to the place that I called home. After 30 years of remission, my mom has 3 malignant tumors back to back, 3 years in a row. Each one we removed with surgery until the 3rd one. That was a stage 4 nightmare. It had fingers, it had snuggled in her sinuses, it had wrapped itself around her carotid artery. Time was not on our side. But in July, she entered aggressive treatments. We called upon our prayer warriors, and by December, that tumor was completely gone. We have witnessed a pure miracle, and Billy Smith can attest to that. So we spent the next year getting through and recovering by playing music, bluegrass, down on the dock with her husband and our mountain friends. We spent many nights laughing under the moon by the fire, and those were the best days. Sharing music with her was a way for us to quiet her storm and just to be thankful that she was alive. She couldn't speak anymore due to those aggressive treatments, but music did all the talking for her. And I actually set up her computer to speak for her too. You could not quiet my mom. So one day, I was enjoying a beer at the Cedar Mountain Canteen, and I heard of a little small place coming up available, and that was the old Cedar Mountain Post Office. Don't know why I raised my hand. We had no money. We were on 1 income at the time. I had no business plan. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was a full-time caregiver for my mom, and I was a full-time mom myself. But my art supplies were taking over our house, so that was my selling point to my husband for me to get my own space. And I was so excited to have something to call my own. Studio276 was on track to open as a place to gather and create Labor Day weekend 2019. And my community was very welcoming. But you see that happy face up there? Well, there's a little thing called 2020 that happened. And that was not fun. The pandemic chaos had spread worldwide. I found that the parties that I had planned were now being canceled. The kids couldn't go to school. Everybody's world just got weird. But in that weird time, it slowed down. Time slowed down. We got a chance to be with our children at home. We got the time to focus on what we needed our business to be when we got out of this mess. And all of it was becoming part of a bigger plan. So, also, not to mention, that was the most beautiful spring I remember having in Cedar Mountain. Nature was thriving when humanity was imploding. So, what did we do? How did we maintain community during this pandemic? I watched my surrounding Cedar Mountain businesses do the pandemic pivot. It was so inspiring to see that shift. We all did our best to spend money at each other's establishments so that we could do our part as a small community to keep the money on the mountain. Studio276 reopened the doors as a learning pod for our kids and others, and I helped them through their virtual learning assignments. After all, I had my elementary education degree from Converse College, so I slid right into that teacher role. I even changed my name so that I could separate being a parent from being a teacher. And those kids were troopers. In the back part of the building, Adam and his dad, now famously known as Papa Moonshine, had begun tinkering around with a little operation at the studio, and they started calling it Cedar Mountain Moonshine. But we didn't make moonshine while the kids were there, so don't worry. But for a small moment in time, we were known as the Schoolhouse Distillery. But then around us, we were also hearing that our local musicians had canceled their gigs for the entire year of 2020. So we got creative. We took on a Friday music night. We invited the community to come visit our establishment, Cedar Mountain Moonshine. We pulled every jar that we had made out, put it under a tent, just so we could sell it to pay our musicians. We invited mass smiles, 6 feet apart, no hugs allowed. In those first Music and Moonshine nights we gathered, we grieved the ones we had already lost to COVID. We grieved our own expectations of what we had of 2020, and we began to heal as a community. Have you been disappointed from something that you wanted to happen, but it didn't happen? Grieving expectations had become my jam. I was finally understanding the definition of true disappointment, and also I realized that I was the one responsible for my own loss of hope or feeling of defeat. This was largely due to an expectation I had set at some point. I had set many over the years. I set them on my parents. I set them on my body, my family, scans, surgeries, you name it. I was expecting it to be awesome. But now in my 40s, I was getting good at accepting the things that I couldn't change. I was now able to find where I had expected too much of someone or something and could sidestep major disappointment with this good grieving tool. Forgive it, forgive myself, and move on. Yay for adulting. So today we can celebrate that Cedar Mountain is a destination, not just a handful of businesses trying to exist outside of city limits. Our moonshine hit the shelves at local ABC stores. We host over 20 events a year between our music nights, artisan markets, holiday events for the kids in the community, and even square dances. I carve out time for local collaborations, and every so often get to create some new shine art. That's art that we make using alcohol inks and our own high-proof moonshine. The Velvet Cup coffee truck added their second location in Cedar Mountain. The new outpost is rocking it. Our local yoga studio is thriving. Canteen is expanding public events. Whistle Stop, Creekside Cafe are keeping up their goodness. And Hiker and the Hound is in the right spot at the right time for outdoor adventures. In May, I finally started my dream to paint a postcard-style mural as a dedication to my mountain on the side of our building. I wanted people from out of town to interact with it as much as our locals could too. There are so many little stories and tributes painted inside of it. You have to come up and see it. In the middle is the Fiddlefly, a tribute to my mom, who actually got to paint part of it while she was fighting a battle with an infection. The Fiddlefly is the epitome of her grace and strength when it came to her own metamorphosis, music being her freedom of flight. Surrounded by family, my mom died the morning of our last Music of Moonshine night in September. I think she timed it perfectly so that we could begin celebrating her life with the biggest party of our music season. It was hard to go from hospice home to a huge event. We had over 300 people, but I couldn't be anywhere else. Cedar Mountain friends and the beyond showed up for our last night and learned the news of her passing. The night was dedicated to her, and she was present in everything, in the music, in the laughter, in the tears, in the hugs, and even in the stories. Grieving my huge loss so publicly was not as easy as getting over one of my expectation hurdles. I looked up synonyms for grief because I was already tired of the word, but those were even worse: anguish, pain, torment, agony, misery. I don't feel like those words matched some of the beautiful things that were happening around the sadness that I was experiencing. My mom lived to live. She made a huge impact in her 67 years of life. I remember she was asked before going into a major surgery, literally on the brink of bleeding out. Her carotid artery had disintegrated. She had no voice. She was on a feeding tube. But they asked her, on a scale of 1 to 5, Ellen, what is your quality of life? And she smiled. She rolled her eyes like, duh, it's a 5. She held up her 5. The doctors needed to know how hard to fight for her, and she gave them no reason to do less. I would do her life a dishonor if I unpacked somewhere in those grief synonyms. Those words have the power to implant expectations that I do not want in my process. I challenge myself to hold up my 5 every day. I can hear my 8-year-old saying, Mom, this is the part where you say you have a beautiful life. And he is right. Despite the darkness, despite the trials and tribulations, he is absolutely right. Life is beautiful. And he also introduces himself as the son of the community at our events. So there's your future mayor right there. Y'all, I can't stand up here and tell you that I've got it all figured out just after 2 months. That's unrealistic. But I am willing to do the work, to take those 2 steps forward, because my mom showed me that the real gift is in the power of community. Thank you.